Hello.
Hello. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Blueprints for Freedom. I am Alyssa Marie, Program Director here at Citywide Youth Coalition, and this is my amazing co-host, the Executive Director, Timo.
Hello.
It is a rainy day, and we hope that you are on your lunch breaks, in your offices, at home, listening to this episode, enjoying a nice little tea or coffee with us as we have this conversation, or eating lunch as you listen to us. Today's episode is titled Seen, Not Heard. This episode is a special episode, a part of our Freedom Week programming, as we are unpacking how young people are too often invited into political spaces for the optics, but not influenced, celebrated on flyers, but silenced at the table. And ooh, do we know about that?
Yeah.
This conversation exposes the tokenization of youth in politics and youth justice work while uplifting the ways young leaders are reclaiming their voices, building power, and demanding more than visibility. They're demanding change. For this conversation, we have an amazing special guest, someone who is near and dear to the hearts of us here at Citywide Youth Coalition, our amazing past fellow, now alum, and now our board of director members, Nora.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Super excited to have this conversation with you. I'll give you some time to introduce yourself, and then we can hop into the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Nora. I was lucky enough to be a part of Citywide in high school. I think I joined when I was 15 or 16 and did abolition boot camp, which totally changed my life, as it does for everyone who does it. And then joined as a political education fellow. I'm now in college at Yale and still sort of continuing organizing in the community in various immigrant rights, housing rights and justice, food justice, and obviously the Palestine Solidarity Movement. So yeah, Citywide is really sort of my organizing home base. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity to join Alyssa and Timo today.
Oh, my heart.
I just love the fact that seeing as our young folks graduate and move out there, they're still doing this work, and it's so dope. Even watching you or showing up in spaces, and they're like, "Oh, Laura was here," and I was like, "Yes, she was." And even supporting the work that you're doing around Palestine and different things like that, it's been a joy and a pleasure to see and watch and be a part of. This is what it looks like. Especially you and Alyssa, you are the epitome of this work, right? Starting up in high school and living and breathing this in real life. It's really dope to see.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. Wow. Okay. Seen, not heard. Lord. There's so many ways we could take this conversation. But we specifically just want to start talking about optics versus power, right? And what we often see is that within a lot of social justice spaces, and a lot of youth organizations, and I think we've seen a lot of this in 2016, 2017, when there was this really big boom in youth organizing. There was this push around the country, but specifically here in New Haven, to create more youth-led, youth-centered spaces. And I think as one of the young people here around that time, I think what we often seen was tables created that supported the agendas that adults were setting, and simply used the imagery of young people being in the space as a way to say that the space was truly youth-led. And I remember coming into this work and talking to our former executive director, Addis, right? And Addis always made something very clear to us that as an organization, as Citywide, it was not our role to determine what was the agenda for young people right? But if anything, our role as a youth serving, youth led organization was to have young people dictate our agenda. And right, our role as an organization that's supposed to be 50 years old was simply to provide the platform for young people, right? Not for us to hold the megaphone, but to pass it directly to young people. But I wonder for y'all, why do you think that doesn't always connect for a lot of organizations? Why does it often tend to just end at having young people at the table, but not actually including them in the change work that is supposed to happen?
Yeah. Amazing question. And like a really hard one to grapple with, I think. I think a lot of it is that, yeah, like you're saying, the optics are great and really helpful, but the work of actually giving young people power is really difficult and like involves not only sort of like a certain kind of humility and being able to say, maybe there's a different generation who has insights that I don't have that I can learn from, but also investing the time and energy to give young people the skills that they need to make decisions and to like be at those tables even effectively. And yeah, I mean, I think that is what was so wonderful about Citywide is we it was this like skill building process at the same time as it was sort of doing the advocacy and trying to get young people to those tables, but making sure that we would be equipped when we got there.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think it's very interesting, Alyssa, your question, because I feel like as the old person in the room, right? I've been in a lot of adult spaces where like it's really challenging. Adultism is real, and I've been in a lot of spaces where I've been like, hey, what about you like step aside and give a young person this role? And they're like, ha ha ha, never. Like it's really like this, oh wait, y'all actually really feel like that. And I remember earlier on when I've been with Citywide since 2018. But like earlier on, I asked my mom, I'm like, do adults genuinely forget what it's like to be a young person? And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, I don't know what that life is like. I'm surrounded by young people every day, but it's like a really good thing. It keeps you grounded, right? And you are able to understand, like, oh wait, you have your own feelings, your own thoughts. You are mostly impacted by the decisions that we make. And just because we're adults does not mean that we are smarter than you. Does not mean that we get it all right all the time, because we don't. Adults make mistakes too. But yeah, I feel like there's this disconnect. Like I feel like I have like one foot in each world. And it's like, I feel like there's this disconnect of understanding that just because you're young doesn't mean you don't know what you're talking about. It doesn't mean that like, I think about just even generationally in the family, like elderly people who spend more time with young people have longer lives. They are happier, they are healthier, right? And they're like, oh, you keep me young, that's why I keep you around. Like that, there's something to that. Like y'all keep us grounded in understanding that some of these things that we're worried about are the way that we're way too overcomplicating things and adding way too many layers to things, where young people have knowledge, they have ideas that it's like, oh wait, maybe if I stop and think about it, oh yeah, you're right, I was thinking about that wrong, get different perspectives. And yeah, like I think a lot of time, like I feel like I'm blessed to have been a part of the Citywide family and having my kids grow with a mom in the Citywide family, because it has directly impacted even how I parent my kids. And I listen to them and I hear them and understand that like you are whole human beings at all ages. And that needs to be honored and it needs to be respected. And I think as I've stepped into the role of ED, right, kind of gleaming off of what Addis has left us, right, and how she transformed the organization, I'm thinking like, look, we've done a good job at making sure that young people have a seat at the table and their voices are heard. And now it's like, how do we train and teach other adults to respect that authority, respect that voice, to listen to that voice, and to actually make changes and moves and policies and behaviors and how they're showing up in spaces, how they're allowing young folks to show up in spaces. So it's no longer just a tokenization system where young folks, it's cute for the photo op, but when it comes down to actually making changes and decisions, they need to be heard. They need to be at the table.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like to say young people to me are the policy experts of this generation, right? And the reason I say that is because no one understands what is needed when it comes to education reform and education legislation better than the people who are sitting at the desk in the classrooms.
Yeah.
Better than the teachers who are teaching in those classrooms. It's definitely not no politician who is spending most of their days up in Hartford legislating. And I think the sad reality to that is that oftentimes, I mean, and we've seen it when we were up at the Capitol advocating for the African American and Latino study bills, how condescending some of these legislators could be to young people when they show up to testify at the Capitol. I just remember this one representative being so condescending to one of the young people from HYV and asking them like very crazy questions around history that we were all just like, is this really happening right now? Like, are we really witnessing this at the state capitol? And it just goes to show, because even then, like, that was a moment that was praised by so many legislators, like, oh my God, young people, they were here and that was so amazing and it was so nice to see them. But like, how many of y'all actually engaged with young people thoughtfully and critically in conversation during that time and in that space? And I don't think we generally seen that from a lot of them, other than just the simple tokenization that there was young people there for them to listen to. And, you know, as organizers, we did our job to make sure our young people were respected. Still, like, that shows up, right? And I even think about the Board of Education here in New Haven, right? And I will never forget the Board of Ed meeting where they were voting on Dr. Burks as superintendent. And you literally had hundreds of signatures from young people telling you that this was not the person that was best fit to lead the school district. And these young people were still ignored. And to even believe at the time, I remember being in high school, like, yeah, we have representation on the Board of Education. Like, they're going to get up there, they're going to do the thing. They didn't care, right? So, like, that's the reality of what tokenization often tend to look like. And I think that's really harmful as a young person being in that space, thinking that you could create effective change, and then realizing that those in that space will not allow you to make that change at all. And actually, we're never interested in you being a part of that. It hurts as a young person who's been in that space. That hurts, right? And a lot of our organizations have done that time and time again.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So there's a part around optics and power, right, where we talk about how it often tends to go to elections, right? And this idea that young people aren't showing up at the polls, young people aren't interested enough, they're too busy thinking about other things. But Nora, as a young person who was very engaged and active, is there any truth behind that? Are young people actually disengaged from the moment?
I mean, definitely not. I think that, yeah, like we've been saying, there's not really the pathways for young people to like be supported in being engaged. And so I think a lot of times people will just write that off at being being disengaged. But I mean, as we can see in this picture that's behind my head right now, in 2022, we had hundreds of young people walk out of schools and demand for cops to be taken out of their schools because young people are getting shipped down the school to prison pipeline every day. And I think that, yeah, that's such a clear example of how important this is, and how if there were voting young people on the Board of Education, maybe that walkout and that movement would have had some teeth in terms of voting and policy in the city of New Haven. But there's no avenues to turning that engagement and like really critical analysis of what's going on in young people's lives and in their schools to actually affecting policy at the city or state or really national level.
And I think part of that is we often get stuck in this idea of youth empowerment, right? And Timo, anytime Timo hears empowerment, Timo cringes internally and is like,
I do not like that word.
but can you explain to us, Timo, as an adult, why you don't like the word empowerment?
All right. So, and it's very interesting because I also hold space in like the philanthropy space, and they love that word. And it is so crazy to me. But yeah, I feel like empowerment to me reads like I'm giving you power, right? Like I am empowering you or injecting you with power. And it's like we all have our own power. There's power within all of us to do the things that we need to do in the way that we need to do them, right? And so I prefer to use the phrase building power with young people because we're doing this together. There's power that young people hold that I do not hold. They are leaders in their own ways in spaces that I could never enter, right? And so I'm not giving them, nor could I ever give them that power. That is power they hold. And I think my role as an adult in this space is to get you to understand that you hold this power internally and teach you how to wield it for the purposes that work for you. And I think a lot of times adults in this space also, when it comes to empowerment, is like, we're giving you power to do a certain thing the way we want you to do it. And if you don't do it in that way, we're either going to disengage or we're going to correct, right? And using in those words, right? And I think it doesn't have to look the way that I did it. It doesn't have to look the way that I envision it to look. And I think back to kind of like the old tropes where like people are like, oh, well, you got to dress a certain way. If you look a certain way, if you act a certain way, then that's what's going to help you move up, right? And that's how you're going to build power and get power, right? And it's like, I don't believe that. Be who you are, move in the spaces and in the ways that work for you. We all have different capacities and our superpowers lie in different areas in life, and we need that. So yeah, I think it's like so deep on so many different levels, but yeah, like there's places I can't give you power. You have power. Right? It's really about unlocking that internal power that you have and teaching you to wield it for good. Because let's be very clear, whatever you consider the other side to be, right? There are people who know how to organize. There are people who know how to build and wield power. Now, are they wielding that power in the best interest of the many and of the all? Not always. But I can't knock that hustle because they got some skills around power building. I just need to co-op some of them skills, right? I can't hate on that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There was a interesting quote from research that was put out by the MHPSS Collaborative, which I think is really real, around what you were mentioning just now, Timo, around how even among well-intentioned entities, like a lot of our youth serving organizations, like the Board of Education, like the City Youth Commission, so on and so forth, right? Even with them being well-intentioned in how they're doing the work, the tokenistic involvement of young people is still very common. And, right, as much as young people are often praised for even stepping into these roles and taking these seats at the table, they still tend to be praised as leaders of the future versus the young people who are leading us today, right? And we know for Citywide, the last 10 years of our organizing history have been led directly by young people. I remember being, I think I was like 13 when I first came into Citywide, or like 14. It was like the cusp of my sophomore year. And I was just coming into Citywide, probably was like a couple of months in, and we were just getting started into the organizing work. And I remember Addis pulling me and a couple of the other youth leaders into a conversation and was like, listen, someone came to us with this idea around this campaign, and I really like it, but I want to know from you all as the young people is this where we're getting ready to move, right? Is this where we're looking to make change at? And I think that's what's required of us as organizers who work with young people. Like Timo said, it's to build power with young people, not build power for young people, because like Timo said, we don't have any power to give. And we definitely don't have the authority to take power away from anybody either. Right, but our job as an organization is to build that power and to build that muscle, especially as young people, to get us to a place where we are building governing power more specifically. Talking about governing power and connecting this to what's happening next week, not just here but across the country, November 4th, Election Day. We know that we know that both political parties, but especially Democrats, love the imagery of youth power and what that looks like, but rarely share decision-making tables with young people. What happens when young people stop letting others set their agenda and start setting their own? And I'll shoot that to either of you.
It's a great question.
So like, as you were talking, what was coming up for me was what's been going on at like the DNC, and how like young folks that are coming in that, and when I say these, and these individuals are brought up in the organizing landscape of things, right? Regardless whether have always agreed with their politics or not, right? Or their anti-racist lens, they've been organizing, right? And there's this movement in the DNC for younger voices, and switching from the old guard to the new guard. And there's been so much pushback, right? And so I'm an independent. I'm not, Democrat, Republican, whatever, right? But I see this just in spaces of power, whether that, like Alyssa said, especially in the Democratic Party, like they are very much like, yeah, we want to see young folks, but when young folks then push up against things, it's like, what, did you fight too hard and you don't want to relinquish the power that you have, right? And it really goes across the board, regardless of what party you're sitting in, right? Like it becomes really important to think about legacy, to think about who are the folks that we are building up next, because we can't be such horrible gatekeepers where we're learning this information, we're learning this knowledge, and we're not able to share it to the next generation so that they can build upon what we're building on now, right? Like they don't need to wait for us to die and move out the way. We can co-create these spaces together. We can co-create policies together. We can co-create tables of power together now, so that there's this overlap. Like there doesn't need to be, and I think that's a big piece of what has caused us to be so stagnant, right? Like the inability to genuinely build legacy, but also across cultural lenses, right? Like, yes, we need to understand how to be anti-racist. Yes, we need to understand how to honor people's identities and their spaces and how they're interacting with the world and how they're showing up in the world and how systems oppress them. And also, across the working class community, we need to come together, because we don't need to be fighting each other. And that includes young folks with adult folks. Like that is one of those identities that I think we forget needs to have some cohesion.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I've also been, everyone has been thinking about and talking about Zohran Mamdani's campaign in New York, which is really exciting. And like, he's grown. I'm not going to call him a young person, but he is certainly part of this like newer generation, young people are getting really excited about doing, like, I have friends who are like, I'm going into New York to do canvassing for Zohran. I'm doing phone banking today for this. And we're not even in New York City. And I think that's because young people recognize that sort of the bipartisan status quo for Democrats and Republicans of the generation whatever political generation that's in power right now, is their policy is organized abandonment, full stop. They don't care about people, they care about maintaining power and maintaining like US imperialism rather than sort of like serving their own communities. And I think that running on a campaign of affordability, of free childcare, of improved public transportation, and like rent stabilization is so powerful, because that's directly serving young mothers who can't afford to go get a job because they have young children. And I think that is sort of what I think of when young people are sort of setting their own agendas, is not some convoluted ass campaign scheme where you're like, okay, like we have to sacrifice this to get this basic right that like we should never have had taken away in the first place, and just to actually give services that are really serving the people of New York City, and hopefully in other cities will follow suit. New Haven next.
Yeah. That's so real. That makes me think a lot about when people be like, oh, y'all on the left have this litmus test that people sort of like have to abide by in order to be seen as like fit or whatever. And I'm like, no, I don't think that's exactly what it is. And Nora, you just named it very clearly. Like this idea that we have to throw people away to build broader coalitions is false, right? Like the idea, and historically we know it's false because we've seen with the Rainbow Coalition how effective it is to build broad coalitions, even when you don't agree on everything ideologically, right? And I think what we're seeing in New York City is that very same thing, that you don't have to throw away trans people, you don't have to throw away immigrants, you don't have to throw away the working class communities in order to win. And I think that's very clear. And I think it's something specifically that Gen Z understands a bit more deeply. And why I think what our generation grew up through has sort of brought us to this place of understanding the need for empathy in how we live with each other, how we exist as a society, right? And the reality that our humanity is tied to each other, our liberation is tied to each other. As someone who subscribes to Black trans feminism and that ideology, like it is true, right? That like once those amongst us who are marginalized all are free, and I think that both ruling parties are interested in that, right? They're interested in their donors, they're interested in protecting their pockets. And we this week at Political Education were just talking about how we were doing a case study of West Virginia and how Democrats lost West Virginia after holding on to it for so many years. But what brought us there was the abandonment of the working class. We know that for young people today, the cost of living is ridiculous. There's no reason why a one bedroom in New Haven is listed as a $2,000 rent. There is no reason why a 3-bedroom apartment in New Haven is almost $4,000.
Yes.
There's no reason why we have an institution within our own city with one of the largest endowments and our education system, and we care so much about young people and the future and leaders and whatever the case may be, but we have a huge deficit here locally where our classrooms are overpopulated, where teachers are being underpaid.
We have a teacher shortage.
Yeah. I mean, nationally, the teachers union is talking about the lack of Black and brown teachers. But then why is there a lack of Black and brown teachers? And no.
It's so interesting how like the argument around representation is so weird. And it's like, when you hear like, oh, well, it's not because of a lack of representation that we don't have these certain individuals. It's just because they're not educated enough. They're not this enough. But then when it's like, oh, no, we can't have representation of these people because they're going to think it's okay to be queer. Ooh, like, it's like, do you not are you just talking in circles now? Like, both can't be true at
Mhm.
the same time. But it's like, even just regardless of whether I agree with their statements or not, the logic is so flawed. But there is, when there's a lack of representation, and when there is a lack, history means something, right? Like, we can't just say, oh, I have no idea why there's not Black and brown teachers, as though we don't understand how history works. And when there's a lack of understanding of how we got to where we are, there's no way you can fix it. There's no way you can critically think about the solutions that are going to be needed in order for us to move forward if we can't even be honest with how we even got here.
Yeah.
And we live in a world where it literally, education is being so curated that it's like, how are we expecting, like, and despite all of this curation, right? Like, we have internet, we have these devices, and the fact that young people are educating themselves on the truth and on history, and on why we are here in the first place, and being able to critically think, speaks volumes to the fact that young people are actively engaged in this process, and are directly impacted by these decisions.
Yes, that is a perfect transition into our very new segment that those of you listeners will see moving forward. And this segment is called Democracy Watchtower. And specifically, it focuses on the state of our democracy, the upcoming elections, and the laws that threaten youth political power. So, welcome to Democracy Watchtower.
I feel like I need to get like some transition music, like like play it in the background. There we go.
So we're going to start talking specifically about the Supreme Court. There is this big case up at the Supreme Court involving Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, right? And for some context, Section 2 protects us against racial discrimination in voting. The recent rulings have narrowed its reach, allowing state to dilute Black and brown voting power, as we're seeing in states like Texas, right? And specifically, the Brennan Center found that Section 2's enforcement increased Black voter turnout up to 6 percentage points in key Southern states, proof that legal protections matter, especially when it comes to voting. So why is this concerning? And why should we be paying attention, not just here locally in Connecticut, but to what's happening across the state? I mean, across the country. Sorry, y'all.
I mean, yeah, I feel like it speaks for itself as to why it's concerning. It's this campaign of disenfranchisement, and just like in a long string of like the erosion of our constitutional rights and every right imaginable. But I think that, yeah, I think that if this were truly functioning as a democracy, like this is not, it's not representational because it doesn't represent what the people want. And I think that the people know that, and they're trying to sort of create these safeguards that will keep them in power and keep people from actually like voting and expressing their will.
I think you said something key there when you said if we were actually living in a democracy.
That part.
It's a very real and important point that like the US has never been an actual democracy. So like to us, this isn't surprising that voters are being disenfranchised, because like voters have always been disenfranchised. And the reality is that we live in an oligarchy, and rich billionaires are going to do what they do. And like as long as the electoral college exists, a true democracy won't flourish here. But you hit it right on the note with that, Nora.
But I think it also goes to like the state of education, right? When it's like they're not teaching us what an electoral college actually is. Most people don't understand how our government works to understand that this is not a true democracy, right? And it's very interesting, specifically thinking about what's at the Supreme Court right now, right? This is coming from a case in Louisiana, right? And thinking about, right, what's going on in Texas and California, right? Like what's on the ballot right now? What is it, like Prop 50? Where we're seeing all of these different states gerrymandering and moving their districts around to gain votes. Some people are like, oh no, we're doing it because of X, Y, and Z. And some people are like, nah, Trump said we need some votes, so we're gonna get some votes. And on the other side, we have Democrats who are also, like we're seeing in California, that want to move districts to appease the political landscape of the day, right? I get the arguments on both sides, right? I don't agree with any of it, right? When the people are not the ones that are dictating how these districts are being drawn on all sides, it's wrong, right? And to this specifically, Louisiana, because they redistricted, which legally based on the 2020, the 2020 census, right? They then created the second largest Black voting bloc in the country. And this is a big reason why it was brought up to the Supreme Court, right? And understanding the history of where this is happening, right, also becomes very important. Like we're seeing a lot of discrimination laws that were put in place to protect Black and brown folks who speak different languages, which is very specific in the second part. It specifically talks about people who speak different languages, right? But we're seeing these laws that were put in place to protect people, and this false narrative around the fact that we no longer need these because racism doesn't exist anymore, and that it's just a feeling and it's not a system, has now created space where we're seeing time and time again where folks who are not oppressed are playing into oppression, are trying to gain oppression. I'm like, oppression ain't cute. It's not a new purse. Oppression ain't the new black. Like it's not. And so we're seeing this erosion because we have a lack of context, we have a lack of history, and we have a lack of understanding of why these laws were put into place. Now we're seeing an attack on democracy where the democracy, the little bit of democracy that we actually have, right? Because we don't have a democracy. And the little bit of freedoms that we fought for are now being eroded. And it makes me think about the fights that we're seeing on the ground here in New Haven, right? And the shifts that we're seeing on the ground here in New Haven, where we're seeing a shift kind of similar to what you brought up to, Alyssa, around what were Democratic strongholds are now shifting. And that's just a part of the political landscape right now. And I'm trying to figure out what are we doing, y'all? And again, it's not about Democrat, Republican. That's not the point. How come it's not shifting to governing working class power? Where's that piece of it? It's really just shifting from one oligarchy to another.
Right. And not even from one to another, because the oligarchs that support the Democrats support the Republicans, and they all support each other. And I'm sure.
Wasn't Trump like a Democratic donor once upon a time?
He was. And I'm sure they're all having tea and biscuits behind the scenes. Like,
yes. 100%.
Absolutely. Yes, they are.
But I think there was this question around, if the courts no longer protect democracy, who will? And then even myself, after I answered it directly for myself and was like, is it even a democracy, girl? Question mark. We're gonna ask the questions because we just got into that. But I want to move us to this other piece that to me is a bit more concerning. And I think it's definitely going to bring up some huge barriers for young people, but specifically for trans folks, for folks who are married, folks who've gotten their name changed in any way, and it's the SAVE Act, right? And basically the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act would require passport or birth certificate proof to register for federal elections. And it's framed as voter integrity, but in reality, we know it is designed to suppress turnout specifically for the 2026 elections, right? And some of the data around it, right? We have over 21 million US citizens that lack the documents required by the SAVE Act, right? Only 1 in 4 Americans with high school degrees or less, and 1 in 5 are earning under $50,000 in this country and have a valid passport, right? Which a passport is not cheap, to be clear, especially not for your average American. People can't often afford to dish out $200 for a passport, right? I think the reality of this is that specifically for working class youth, trans youth, and first-time voters, these are going to be some huge new obstacles that are going to be coming up, right? And maybe in states like Connecticut, we might be safe and not feel the full impact of this, but our brothers and sisters and siblings in the South will most definitely feel the impact of the SAVE Act, right? And this isn't about fraud prevention as folks are trying to frame it. It is about fear. They know that young voters are rising. They know that we are building power, and just as much as we're building power, they're building barriers, right? So what are y'all seeing as some of the consequences to the SAVE Act if it goes through?
Yeah, I mean, I think like you're saying, this is also part of a project of defining citizenship, really, to sort of in like a concrete sense of these people can vote and these people can't, but also in an abstract sense of these people belong and these people don't. And of course, it's the poor working class, often youth, who don't belong and who are consistently excluded. And I think that, yeah, this is just putting that into practice, and it's certainly going to have an effect on voting turnout and the election.
Yeah. There's so much about this act that concerns me. Even just thinking about names that are not your stereotypical names, right? Like, for example, I've had a name change, and I have some documents that have a space in my name, some documents that don't have a space in my name. And I've been caught up at the airport where it causes issues. When you think about people who might have accents in their names, that their birth certificate doesn't have an accent, but their driver's license does. Or in some spaces, it's just a space instead of an accent. And so there's a lot of concern around how this is going to directly impact specifically people of color. Right. And I think also I had this flashback to, oh gosh darn it, I just had the name in my head. That TV show with the women who are like no longer have rights and stuff on Hulu.
Handmaid's Tale.
That part. So yes. So I think about Handmaid's Tale, right? And so I think about these particular folks, and I don't know if y'all have been paying attention to like this push around Christian nationalisms, around like household voting, where like they want the head of the household, the man, quote, to have the vote for like their house. Like, I don't know if this has been on anybody else's radar. And I'm like, as a Christian, I am on Christian YouTube and this keeps popping up. And I'm just like, come on, what are we doing here? Right. And I think for, like Alyssa had mentioned, for women who've been married, right, you might have a legal documented name change, but that doesn't mean it's changed on your birth certificate. And so how many women, when they get married, or just people in general, right? Like my brother and his husband they both took each other's last names. And so that's not reflected on their birth certificates. Right. And so it's, how do you, like there's so many different layers to this, and there's so many different things that could possibly stop folks from being able to vote, right? In a way that really represents, and I get it in the sense of like, look, there's so much fear mongering. There's so much misinformation. There's so much information that it's hard for people to find actual information. And look at the statistics. People make decisions based on how they feel, right? And that's just a human fact that's been scientifically proven. And so people can look at stats all day, but if they feel like they're not safe, then they're not safe. right? If they feel they're being gypped, then they're being gypped, right?
Yeah.
And so there's this constant balance of how do we put out facts so people understand what's really going on, and also that's what people say, change hearts and minds. It's really the hearts. um, and these acts are really feeding off of the fear that has been stoked for decades. Like I think back to like what was it, the super predators in the 90s, right, where like even we had black mamas and grandmamas in black communities locking their doors when young black and brown men were walking down the street because they bought into this idea that they were dangerous, right, despite the fact that some of these young black and brown boys in the hood be some of the nicest, sweetest people I'd have ever met, holding doors, helping you carry your groceries in the store. But we don't talk about that narrative, right? And so media is so important, right? Social media, the news media, getting correct information is so important. And that's why things like Blueprints for Freedom, right? It becomes so important because it's real information from people who are really on the ground.
Yeah, I think I wanted to touch on, you brought up The Handmaid's Tale. And I thought this was a perfect space to mention this. I realize a lot of people bring up The Handmaid's Tale and talk about it as like this dystopian thing, and like, oh my God, our life is starting to look like The Handmaid's Tale. We've been hearing that a lot. We've been seeing people show up at actions dressed as The Handmaid's Tale.
Yes.
And I just want to remind folks that the writer of The Handmaid's Tale literally says, I didn't make any of this up, right? She says, when I wrote The Handmaid's Tale, nothing went into it that had not happened in real life somewhere at some time. The reason I'm making that rule is I didn't want anybody saying, you certainly have an evil imagination, you made up all these bad things. So like, just a reminder to folks that like what you're seeing in The Handmaid's Tale has literally happened somewhere in this world at some point, right? And we know that history repeats itself.
Yeah.
So I would implore folks to not sort of dive into this despair that I tend to see a lot of folks do. Like, it's starting to feel like the Hunger Games. It's starting to feel like The Handmaid's Tale. Like, y'all, we are literally, it's not starting to feel, we have been feeling the pains of capitalism and the impacts of capitalism on our community for very long. And the question is, do we continue to let these billionaires eat off of our backs, or do we stand up and flip their table over?
Yeah. No, and I think it also begs us, we need to remember that America's a baby country, right? Like when we look at our trajectory, and also like you're saying, like history repeats itself. Like we're seeing almost every country has gone through this at some point in time, right? And they've been around much longer than us. But it also gives me hope because I'm seeing and Alyssa and I were talking about this the other day, like there's all of these youth uprisings around the world right now. And Gen Z is taking over and pushing people out of power and putting new people in power. And like we see also this trajectory of revolution. There we go. I always get like revelation and revolution mixed up. But like everything is cyclical. History does repeat itself. And every movement and every uprising has had a strong youth influence. And like we forget MLK and all those folks, they were not 50, 60 years old, right? They were young bucks, like and so there is a lot of hope, but also the United States is very young. And so we are going to go through like a totalitarian this and this, that, like this is the only country that has not had to go through that yet. But many other countries have gotten out of it. And there's still hope. So like, yes, there's these attacks on the democracy, but what I don't want us to do is just like lay down, roll over and play dead or play this escapism. And it's like, I even fall into it too. And I'm like, I want to get out of America. Where's my dual citizenship at? Like, when am I leaving? Like, yes, your girl loves to travel and be outside of the United States because yes, it's important to see other human beings and learn other cultures and honor and appreciate those things. But also as a Black American, like being patriotic is so weird. Like there's this like weird dichotomy here of I love you, but also you don't love me back. But I think young people feel that too, right? Where like a lot of young people across the globe are just checking out or fighting back. And I would love to see more of us fighting back and really holding true to what we believe this nation really can be.
Yeah, I mean, youth in Nepal toppled their government this summer.
Yes.
Last summer, youth in Bangladesh toppled their government. Like this shit is happening. I think that like you're saying, I think revolution in outside of the US versus in the US looks very different because we are in the heart of empire, and I think we're used to a lot of sort of comfort that isn't true for the rest of the world. But that is a possibility, and there are youth doing that work all over the world, like as we speak.
No, and I would say we have real examples of like what that looks like here in the US too. I mean, talking about Puerto Rico in 2019, and how they ousted their governor after making fun of over 3,000 deaths of Puerto Ricans on the island and these secret group chats and all these things, right? But we see young people in the streets by the thousands in Puerto Rico over, I think it was like a week long of protesting until the governor resigned, right? And this guy went into it thinking that he would never resign, but young people applied pressure, right? But I think the other piece to it is that these movements are also intergenerational, right? Require the support of adults, right? But the energy of young people, right? I'm at the place in my life. I'm an old lady.
Stop.
I don't be having
somebody auntie.
I don't be having the energy to run 7 blocks and do the things like I used to back in the day. But
Alyssa be like, it's cold. My knees.
No, my fingers start to hurt really bad.
I feel like it's the opposite because people be like, oh, you look like you in your 20s, and I feel insulted. I was like, I have a 15-year-old. How dare you?
That's right.
But right, like for those of us who are elders in this work, like the work for us doesn't end either, right? So to me, this is more of a direct message to elders and organizing. Find young people to connect to, right? The lessons that you've learned are important to be passed down to younger generations of organizers. I would not be where I'm at as an organizer if I didn't have trusted mentors like Addis, like Sarana, like Lorenzo, and so many other really dope, amazing organizers in the state that passed down lessons that they learned over the years that made sure that we as organizers as young people weren't stepping into some of the same landmines in organizing that they had already stepped in. So I implore older folks to really not disengage. And I think it's easy because there's this cyclical cycle of like, you get old and then all you do is criticize the younger generation for what they're not doing. But I implore us to not stay in that cycle and really break out of it and engage with young people. There's so much to learn from them. There's so much joy that comes from doing youth work. And there's even more joy when you allow young people to lead and you get to take a step back and watch them lead and be like, damn, they did that. They some badasses, right? Some of my like most proudest moments in organizing weren't even moments where I was leading, where I was talking. It was moments where I was watching our young people lead, where I was watching our young people challenge elected officials. Those were the happy moments.
Yeah, and I think like just to add to that, I think that there can sometimes be like this push and pull when doing youth work as an adult, right? Where let's be clear, we are all struggling with internalized racial oppression, internalized racial superiority, right? In our own levels, like how we, depending upon how we identify. And so it's really important that we create space to have those conversations because adults carry this, right? And sometimes it really it comes out when we're in youth spaces. And I've even felt that. And it's like, dang, I wish I had this space when I was a young person. And it's like that I want that space now. And it's like, I can't co-opt the young folks space because we built this because we didn't have this, and we can't take it away from them because we now want that. And so it also becomes important for us to create our own spaces where we can feel fulfilled, right? Emotionally, physically, tangibly, right? Because there's also that need to be able to do the things that we want to do, tap into our own creativity, right? Tap into spaces that affirm us, who we are, where we're at in those moments and in those spaces. And so it's one thing to, yes, create those spaces for young folks. And there's so much joy and such a reward to see when young people have that aha moment and they get it. And then they're like, I remember watching Nora on the steps of City Hall, and I was like, that's Nora. I was like, yo, I had, like, me and Alyssa have had some teary-eyed moments together. Talk about our babies, and like when we thought, like, that's my kid. You know?
That's right.
So it's like, yes, those moments exist, but we also have to make our own spaces for ourselves, because we can't be co-opting this work, y'all, because it is so necessary for our young people to also feel fulfilled now, so they don't carry that harm and that hurt and that wound right into adulthood like some of us have had to carry.
Okay, yeah, we have made it to the last 6 minutes of this episode, so I will give each of you some time to give your closing statements, and then I will close us out. So I will pass it to you, Nora.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this has been such a wonderful conversation. I've learned so much from both of you, as I'm always doing every day of my life. And yeah, I think this just speaks to the importance of like of kind of what y'all have been talking about, the intergenerational support and the keeping institutional memory alive and passing that down and equipping young folks with skills and also with history and understanding whose shoulders that we're standing on and really carrying the weight of that responsibility is so important. But yeah, I think lots of scary things happening in the world right now, and really grounding in that sort of continuity and sort of continuity, and the things that we as young people inherit from you all, the wisdom and what you guys have already built, and being able to trust young people to take it in maybe a totally wild, totally unimaginable direction, but one that's their own and that it aligns with what they're experiencing right now and also what their vision is for the future.
Yeah. No, this has been really dope. And it's always really good to see you, Nora. But also like hearing about like in the name drop, like, oh, you know Nora? Yeah, I know Nora. Okay, we be out here, right? But no, I think that this conversation is always necessary, right? Because we are not infallible. We all pass away, right? And it becomes important to create a legacy, and sustainability, and understand that these systems will not be dismantled in a generation or 2 generations, right? And I think about, as you were talking, Nora, I think about the this Hill documentary that we shared over at Yale School of Psychiatry. You know what I'm talking about. Like there's this, and then it's like this is like back in the day, right? Like 80s. And it's like they didn't have Instagram, they didn't have Live, they didn't have YouTube, but they documented the movement. I think about old videos of Black Panthers or the Young Lords and like those photos in black and white and those iconic moments. And it's like, how are we documenting the movement right now? And with all of this stuff going on, it's like, how are we also not losing those interpersonal relationships that we need to build and grow, especially intergenerationally? But yeah, I think that I would love to have another conversation and have more young folks up here and hearing different perspectives and like what folks are doing across the country, right? Like there's, like you said, like there's movements, like young folks are making moves. They're making history. They literally are building governing power and governing their countries in ways that not only benefit them, but benefits the adults in their spaces. And I think that's what we forget is when we have young people at the table, when you have the most impacted people at the table, they build policies, they build change, and they move society forward for the benefit of all of us.
Yeah.
Not just themselves. And I think that's the biggest piece. I think we forget how selfless young people can be sometimes.
Thank you. I just have some quick thoughts, right? Rapid fire. Tokenization mirrors political suppression, right? So for those of us within our organizations who are doing justice work, we are no different than politicians who are stripping folks their rights to vote away when we are sitting young people at our tables and ignoring them. That's one. Real democracy requires that power be equally distributed amongst its constituents, and we aren't seeing that. We are seeing power recorded at the top level. So I say to all of us in the working class, it is time that we fight back against the 1%, especially young people. They are playing in our face with our future, with our livelihoods, and we must organize and resist, especially during this time. Young people have always been the answer, will always be the answer. We know that very true. And to close us, I just want to say that being seen isn't enough anymore, that these young people are the generation that refuses to be a decoration on someone else's agenda. These young people are building a movement that is demanding that democracy means something, that the pursuit of happiness, justice, and dignity for all actually means something in this country. And I think what young people have made clear to me in the last couple of years, that it is until, if they are not seen, if they are not heard, they are going to continue to build power. And us here at Citywide Youth Coalition will continue to be their political home to do that. So I implore all of you, if you have $1, donate on over at the Citywide Youth Coalition website and make sure to support the work that's happening here. But not just here at home. We know that there are some tough challenges in the next month across the country with a shortage in food. So I do just want to take a moment to say to support your local food pantries, to lean into mutual aid services and make sure that we are showing up for each other. Check on your neighbors, even if you don't want to go to a food pantry. And some extra food, and you know there's a single mom next door with kids. Look out for each other. These times are hard, but the way we survive and get through them is by leaning on each other. So
absolutely, let's tap into community, y'all.
Yes. For future events, follow our Instagram page really quickly. This Friday, we'll be at the New Haven Pride Center with Bima La Autónoma for the Day of the Dead.
Saturday. I thought it's Saturday.
Yeah, Saturday. That's not what I said.
Friday.
Saturday, November 1st, we'll be at the Pride Center with BLA, specifically honoring women who have been victims of femicide and women who've been victims of trans femicide. It starts at 6 p.m., so check us out there. You'll also be able to find us outside of 928 Chapel Street on Monday doing some outreach and giving out hot cocoa and coffee. So if you want to stop by and say hi to the team and our young people, stop by there around 3 p.m. And other than that, follow our Instagram to stay updated. Nora, thank you for joining us for this episode. It was great having you, and we will see all of you next time.
Thank you for having me.
Bye, y'all.